Chapter 771 Honor Guard. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After it became apparent that Nephice was not going to go on a destructive rampage, the cohort did not get a lot of time to spend with their friend before the government agents whisked her away. Cassie barely managed to squeeze her hand, while Effie and Kai could only express their joy with words. Sonny remained silent, still preoccupied with his tumultuous thoughts. The corner he was standing in became even darker than it had been before. Neff herself seemed a bit disoriented, so their short reunion had turned out to be somewhat muddled. There were certain procedures involved when a person awakened, and even more once they ascended. All kinds of interviews, evaluations, and tests had to take place. All kinds of reports had to be submitted, all types of permissions had to be granted, and all varieties of procedures had to be enacted. The bureaucratic machine stirred awake to legitimize and integrate a new master into the larger framework of humanity. Sonny knew the process well, because he had gone through it himself. It was just that his own experience had been separated into two distinct instances, and made smoother by Master Jet's participation. Nephice, on the other hand, had to go through both sets of procedures at once, which was more or less unprecedented. She also did not enjoy the patronage of a high-ranking government representative, yet. Perhaps that would not last long. There were other complications, as well. Her situation was unique and abnormal in more than one sense. Just the fact that she had become a master without establishing a gateway anchor in the dream realm alone was enough to make the bureaucracy stutter. The government agents had their work cut out for them. It was not all bad, however. The process, while slightly obnoxious, was there for a reason. It was not only about gathering the necessary information and officially establishing the Ascendant's new and elevated status. It was also designed to help the return deal with the most damaging effects of suddenly coming back to safety after experiencing untold horrors in the nightmare, at least to a certain degree. No matter how strong Changing Star was, no one doubted that her harrowing adventure through the dreamal realm and the nightmare had left its scars on her mind. The government was well aware of how fragile many powerful awakened truly were. It was not only on guard against those who could break, but also experienced in employing all kinds of preventative measures to reduce the possibility of that happening. Due to how important Nephice was both to the propaganda machine and to the actual defensive efforts of humanity as another special strategic asset, the government threw its best resources into ensuring that the initial steps of her rehabilitation went as smoothly as possible. Of course, she was free to decide how much exactly she was willing to share. Some basic tests, however, were mandatory, since it was necessary to determine how safe it was to release her into the population. What it meant was that it would take long hours before the members of the cohort would be able to see Changing Star again. They weren't the only ones waiting, too. At some point, Cassie had left and returned to the Dream Realm to inform the Fire Keepers of the incredible new development. Soon enough, dozens of them used the gateway in the Ivory Tower and returned to the waking world for the first time in months. Since their sleeping pods were situated right there in the hospital complex of the Academy, it did not take a long time for all of them to gather in the hallway near where Nephice was undergoing her interviews. Now, around 50 young awakened crowded it, as if standing guard. After spending almost half a year in the Dream Realm, the Fire Keepers looked rough around the edges, if not a little feral. They were wearing civilian clothes, but no one would mistake these people for mundane humans, or even ordinary awakened. There was a strong sense of silent threat radiating from them. Their expressions were full of glee, but their gazes remained firm and heavy, making anyone who approached feel ill at ease. That was especially true for the members of Cassie's former cohort, which was now led by the stoic healer, Shim. They were all on high alert and ready to pounce on anyone representing a threat. With the Fire Keepers standing guard, any potential action by the great clans was bound to end in failure, or at least outright disaster. In fact, they seemed so fierce that even the security teams of the Academy became nervous and sent a few cohorts of their own to keep watch on the celebrating group. It was easy to read the extreme apprehension on the faces of the security officers, though. Awakened or not, they seemed to understand that they stood no chance against the elites of the Forgotten Shore if push came to shove. Observing all that, Sunny couldn't help but ask himself a question. If 6 months of hiding in the relative safety of the Ivory Tower had such a drastic effect on the Fire Keepers, then what had 2 years of traversing some of the direst regions of the Dream Realm done to Nephis? After a while, he quietly approached Cassie and asked quietly. "How is it going?" She turned her head slightly and frowned. "What do you mean?" Sunny smiled darkly. "Come on. There's no chance that you did not use your ability on one of the government agents handling Neff's processing. So what is happening?" She hesitated for a few moments, then sighed. She seems to be in shock, somewhat. But mostly, she's fine. Actually, it's a bit disturbing how fine she is. He frowned. "Well, it's Nephis. You know how she is." Cassie slowly shook her head. "She is human too, Sunny. It's just easy to forget that fact sometimes because it's her." Sunny fell silent, not knowing what to say. After a few moments, the blind girl suddenly spoke again. She seems reluctant to speak about most of what happened to her, but, at least, she agreed to receive psychological counseling. That's a good start. He blinked a couple of times. Nephis agreed, to what? The idea of Changing Star being willing to undergo something like counseling did not fit into his head. It was just too bizarre to imagine. Sunny frowned. Maybe she did change, a little. Finally, after long hours of waiting, the government agents seemed to finish the bulk of their tests. The doors opened, and the familiar figure stepped out of them. Just like on the first day Sunny had met her, Nephis was wearing a simple government-issued tracksuit. Her silver hair, however, was now long and lustrous, framing her face and making her look strangely feminine. Her beauty was stunning. When Changing Star appeared, it seemed as though the whole hallway became a little brighter. Looking at the members of her cohort and the Fire Keepers gathered around them, Nephis hesitated for a moment, and then smiled awkwardly. "Hello, everyone. I am glad to meet you all again. I did not think that I would." Before she was even done speaking, Cassie stepped forward and enveloped her in a tight hug. Chapter 772 Journey to the East. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Some time later, all 5 members of the cohort finally found themselves alone. The Fire Keepers were still around, but decided to give their leader some much-needed privacy. As the result, only Nephis, Sunny, Cassie, Effie, and Kai remained in a spacious hospital room. Changing Star was standing by the window, looking at the peaceful landscape of the academy ground with a strange, still expression. She seemed to have regressed to her old self, which had trouble communicating emotions and interacting with people. For that reason, it was hard to understand what she was thinking about. The others gave her some space. Despite the fact that Nephis was standing right in front of them, it was not too easy to come to terms with the fact that she was actually, truly back. They were still struggling to get used to this new reality, but a warm wave of relief and happiness was slowly rising in their hearts. Sunny was no different. It was just that his joy was somewhat overshadowed by a contradicting feeling of unease and apprehension. Finally, Nephis sighed and turned around. A pale smile appeared on her face. You are all masters. I did not expect that." Effie, who was sitting comfortably on a cushy chair with her legs stretched, laughed. "You're one to talk." Neff studied the 4 of them, then let out a slow sigh. "I did not even know if all of you managed to survive. I hoped, of course. So I am very glad to see that you did. And helped each other." A distant look appeared on Kai's face. He remained silent for a bit, remembering the events of the second nightmare, and then said gently. "Yes, we had each other to lean on in our darkest moments. But you were completely alone, all that time. Lady Nephis, please forgive me, but how did you survive?" Nephice looked away with a smile. That I wasn't really completely alone, too. Then, she walked over to the hospital bed and sat down, facing them. There is not much to tell, really. The Crimson Terror was in its most vulnerable state when I reached the top of the spire. Unrestrained by the dark sea, she had absorbed countless souls and was in the middle of an arduous evolution. With the help of the Dawn Shard, I was able to strike her down. That simple explanation did not really do justice to the incredible accomplishment of slaying a fallen terror, but Neff seemed reluctant to dwell too much on that part of her story. She also decided to skip the part about their confrontation with Sunny entirely. Instead, she looked at the window and continued. After she died, however, the spire became unstable. The gateway collapsed, and the tower itself soon followed. I barely escaped the debris. The artificial sun of the Forgotten Shore was extinguished, as well, submerging it into absolute darkness. The labyrinth itself perished, too, the crimson coral turning gray and slowly crumbling to dust. With no sea, no sun, and most nightmare creatures eradicated by the culling, it became a lightless and desolate place. She sighed. I traveled back to the Dark City and spent some time there, hunting down the remaining abominations and preparing for a long journey. With the help of the Dawn Shard and the Nameless Sun, many powerful nightmare creatures fell to my blade. For a while, I entertained the idea of trying to cross the Hollow Mountains, but eventually had to abandon it. Nothing but death awaited me there. So, I had to choose another direction. Nephice paused for a moment, then continued in a steady tone. I knew that the deadly mountain chain stretched further than Ravenheart in the west. There was no passage there. Going north meant moving further away from human citadels. So, it only left east. There was a chance that the Hollow Mountains were not as tall and unassailable there, or even that there was an end to them somewhere in those unexplored regions. It was only a chance, but it was all that I had. So, I left the Dark City and retraced the steps of the journey that Sunny, Cassie, and I had made before, avoiding the Ashen Barrow, of course. Sunny moved slightly, remembering their encounter with Soul Devourer. He had not forgotten his promise to come back and destroy the damned tree. Granted, he had no plans of returning to the Forgotten Shore, currently. Even his pettiness had a limit. Maybe he would still be able to exact his revenge on the vile fiend one day, though. Changing Star, meanwhile, continued her tale. Eventually, I reached the edges of the Forgotten Shore and crossed into a vast and terrible desert. Seeing the sun and the stars once again, it was like a blessing. But that blessing came with its own curse. The desert had once been the site of a great battle, I think, or maybe that land had been turned into a lifeless desert by the battle, instead. In any case, echoes of the clash between powers well beyond our comprehension still linger there, making it a dire and deadly place. As Sunny remembered the white desert from her dream, Nephice paused, and then continued in a somber tone. But at that point, it was too late for me to turn back. Following along the Hollow Mountains, I ventured into the desert and made my way further east. Unfortunately, no matter how many days I traveled, the misty peaks showed no signs of abating. Eventually, I knew that I could not continue. I think that the White Desert is impossible to cross. The parts of it I only barely survived were on the periphery of the ancient battlefield. The deeper I went, the more terrifying it became. The inner reaches of that region, where the true clashes had happened, had to be a death zone of its own. Worse still, even if one manages to resist the many horrors dwelling there, the desert itself will eventually kill them. There is simply no way to survive it. She looked at them, white sparks igniting in her eyes. With no way forward and no way back, I grew desperate enough to finally venture into the Hollow Mountains. However, I had no hope of traversing them and reaching the human territories on the other side. I had also failed to find any sign of a gateway in my long travels. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I tried to find a seed of nightmare. Eventually, and with some help, I encountered one near the boundary of the dark realm that hides within the mountains, and challenged it. A pale smile appeared on Nef's face. And here I am. Safe and sound. She grew silent for a few moments, and then added quietly. Well, not quite. But I am still alive, at least. Chapter 773 Catching Up. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. It took some time for the members of the cohort to digest Nef's story. Sunny, especially, felt like she did not tell them even a fraction of what had happened to her. But then again, was it even possible to describe 2 years of never-ending struggle for survival with just a few words? Not even considering the things that Changing Star might have wished to keep to herself, and he was sure that there were plenty, she would have had trouble describing even the things that she wanted to share. It was going to take time. As for the actual secrets, while he was dismayed and uneasy, Sunny himself was known to keep a lot of things close to his chest. More than that, they all had to be cautious about what they said. The room provided to Nephi's by the academy might have been safe, but that did not mean that it was not monitored. That was the reason why both Effie and Kai remained mostly silent despite the fact that they clearly had a lot of questions. Unlike Sunny, they did not possess a good understanding of Changing Star's aspect and current class. All they knew was that she possessed a divine aspect, just like Sunny and Mordred did. Eventually, Cassie broke the silence. It is fine. Now that you are back, everything is going to be fine. She paused, and then added somberly. However, our current situation is very delicate. Nephis looked at her and frowned, the white sparks in her eyes becoming a little brighter. Were there any complications after you returned from the Forgotten Shore? She was alluding to Castor, the great clans, and the sovereigns that wished her dead, of course. Sunny finally spoke. Not immediately. But we ran into some trouble not long before venturing into the second nightmare. Changing Star's frown deepened. Can you tell me what exactly happened? He shrugged. I can. But we'll get you up to speed later, in a more private setting. For now, let's just say that there was supposed to be a negotiation with the representatives of the great clan Valor today. Which fell through, for obvious reasons. Sunny paused for a moment, and then added. Other than that, the important things to know are, let me think, actually. I am a renowned academic and an instructor at the academy now. Cassie leads the Fire Keepers. Oh, Fire Keepers are the Forgotten Shore survivors whom you saw outside. They are basically your groupies. Right, you are famous now. Very, very famous. There is even a movie about you, with a very well-received romantic subplot. What else? We have a flying ship and an exclusive citadel in the Dream Realm. Effie moved in with me, Night Gale disbanded. Nef's face slowly turned paler and paler. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and raised a hand. What? Wait, what? Kai, is this true? Night Gale disbanded. Sunny glanced at her darkly. Really? That is your first question. Kai, meanwhile, looked down in embarrassment. Yes, I am sorry to say this, but Gale and I decided to go our separate ways. It is for the best. My status as a master would have just dragged him down, especially because my aspect evolved after I killed that dragon. Nephis blinked. A dragon. Sunny grinned. Oh yes, Kai killed a transcendent dragon. Effie and I killed a couple of saints, too. I even killed the same one twice. First time before I was beheaded, the second time after. Changing Star slowly raised her second hand and grabbed her head. I think I need a moment. Wait, can you start from the beginning? A strange expression suddenly appeared on her face. And did you say something about a movie? With a romantic subplot. What? Sunny had a bit of fun filling Nephis in on what had been going on with the four of them, and the waking world, during her absence. There was a lot of ground to cover, but he chose only the juiciest moments. Like falling into a bottomless abyss for a month straight on top of a dead demon, being burned by divine flames, and discovering an ancient tower left behind by a mysterious deity. Or finding out that Effie was confined to a wheelchair in the waking world, only to see her leave it behind after conquering the second nightmare. Or slaying a corrupted monster to get their hands on a shipwrecked flying vessel and repair it. Or watching two saints obliterate an entire island as they fought to the death. The list went on and on. After a while, Neff weakly waved her hand. I think I need a break. Can you guys give me a few minutes? By then, it was already late into the night. It was dark outside the window, with only pale moonlight and powerful beams of defense turrets illuminating the black sky. Sunny grew silent, then shrugged. Sure. You need some rest, anyway. We can continue in the morning. The government should be ready to release you by then, too. Have you thought about where you want to go? Staying here in the academy is an option too, of course. He thought for a few moments, and then added awkwardly. I feel stupid asking this, but do you have a place to stay? Do you have money? Are there people we need to contact? What is your clan situation, exactly? Nephis absent-mindedly touched her neck, then answered in a neutral tone. There is, a manor. That is pretty much the only property the clan has left. Everything else was liquidated and sold a long time ago. I sealed it before leaving for the first nightmare, so it should have remained empty for the last 3 years. It's hard to say what state it's in. She lingered for a moment, and then added. I should have a bit of money left. And there are no people. Most of our retainers fled over the years, and the rest left after my grandmother passed away. That was not too long before my nightmare, too. I'll have to think about what to do now. Sunny looked at her, and then frowned a little. What about safety? Aren't you concerned about, your previous issues? Nephis remained silent for a long time, then shook her head. I don't think anyone will try to kill me anytime soon. He glanced at her with dark curiosity. Really? Why? Some people weren't shy about it before. Changing Star looked at him, and then said evenly. Because now, I am not easily killed. Chapter 774 Fundamental Changes. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. She wasn't wrong. As the members of the cohort left the room to give Nephis time to rest, Sunny was deep in thought. Changing Star was an ascended tyrant now. Killing her was much harder than assassinating a mundane child that was protected only by the dwindling forces of a fallen clan, especially due to the nature of her powers. In fact, short of sending a saint to do the job, nothing the great clans could throw at her would work. Saints were a precious resource, however, and more than that, rare enough to make their movements almost impossible to hide. Unless the sovereigns were ready to abandon all pretenses of civility, there was no easy way to get rid of Nephis anymore. She had ensured that by becoming a master directly. The situation had fundamentally changed. And that was not even accounting for the tremendous public outcry that would result from something like that ever coming to light. Whether the great clans wanted to admit it or not, they were still tied to the rest of humanity. All awakened came from mundane humans, after all. Losing the support of the masses would threaten the very base of the power that the sovereigns enjoyed. Come to think of it, getting rid of Sunny was almost equally as hard. He doubted that any master, with the exception of maybe direct children of Anvil of Valor, would be able to pose a serious threat to him. There were 2 more great clans to consider, of course. But he doubted that any scion of Song or Night was more dangerous than the Princess of War, Morgan. So, what did it all mean? It meant that their position in the negotiations had vastly improved. They could exert much more pressure on Valor, and achieve much better results. That was if Nephis did not do anything extreme, of course. Which she was more than capable of doing, considering her searing hatred for the 3 sovereigns. After hesitating for a bit, Sunny walked over to Cassie, leaned on the wall near her, and asked quietly. What do you think she will do? The blind girl understood his meaning without having to specify what exactly the question was about. Perhaps she was considering the same issue. Cassie lingered for a moment, then said quietly. Negotiate. Sunny barely suppressed a chuckle. Negotiate. Are we talking about the same Nephis? Do you know how much she despises the great clans? What her insane ambitions are? Somehow, I feel that 2 years of barely clinging to life in the dream realm did nothing to blunt her resolve. If anything, I think that it has only been sharpened. The blind girl remained silent for a while, then sighed. I think so too. However, there is little choice. She is still too weak to face the enemy directly. It is because her resolve remains the same that she will have to make herself flexible. A dark expression appeared on Sunny's face. When have you ever known Neff to be flexible? Cassie turned her head slightly, facing him. Her expression was somber and serious. Neff can be whatever she needs to be to achieve her goals. Same as you. Don't forget that. What was that supposed to mean? Sunny grimaced, then looked away. After a while, he asked in a grim tone. So where does it leave us? Whether he wanted it or not, he was tied to Nephis. That bond was strong, but not unbreakable. If he really wanted to, he could attempt to destroy it. He could kill her. He could run away. He could try to find a more obscure method. However, Sunny did not know if he was willing to pay the price of destroying their bond. At least not until he saw a sign that Changing Star was willing to wield her power as his master, not just possess it. Unless she did, he was only a slave in the name. Although reluctantly, Sunny was barely able to tolerate such an arrangement. Having a master that was unwilling to exercise her power was even beneficial to him, since it protected him from others who would want to abuse that power, like Mordred, for example. If his position as Neff's shadow ever gained substance due to her actions, however, then, one of them was going to have to die. That Sunny was certain of. He wouldn't hold anything back to make sure that he was the one left standing in the end, as well. But that moment had not yet come. And hopefully, it was never going to. So, for now, his future was doomed to be influenced by the decisions Nephis made. The blind girl sighed. Where does it leave us? Even I don't know. Everything is changing, Sunny, and all we can do is try to change as fast as it does. That is the only way to keep ourselves and those we care about safe from the world. Sunny looked at Cassie, trying to understand the implications hidden in her words. Then, he said in a grim tone. Who's going to keep the world safe from us? The next day, a small convoy of PTVs left the academy grounds. Most of them carried the fire keepers, while the members of the cohort were seated together in one of the vehicles. For obvious reasons, neither Sunny nor Effie knew how to drive. Cassie was unable to steer a PTV, as well. So, in a strange turn of events, Ascended Nightingale, a famous idol and global celebrity, ended up playing the role of the chauffeur. Kai and Sunny sat in the front, while the 3 young women remained at the back of the vehicle. As the convoy moved through the streets of the city, they briefly explained the more sensitive details of the cohort's current situation to Nephis. The column of PTVs was headed toward a remote district where Immortal Flame's sealed manor was situated. It was decided that the Fire Keepers would establish their Waking World headquarters there. At some point, however, a single vehicle quietly separated from the convoy and dove into a high-speed tunnel, unnoticed. Soon, it appeared in a peaceful neighborhood full of beautiful terraces and parked near a gray 2-story house with a cozy synthwood porch. Sunny left the PTV first and then stood silently for a few moments, waiting for others to do the same. Then, he looked at Nephis, cleared his throat, and said awkwardly. Welcome to my humble abode, I guess. It, has designer lamps and a state-of-the-art refrigerator. Among other things. Chapter 775 Café Sunless. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. After the five of them walked inside, Nephis remained silent for a few moments as she looked around. Although her face was still and stoic as ever, Sunny could have sworn that he noticed a hint of curiosity reflected in her cold gray eyes. After a while, she asked, "This is your home?" Due to her sheltered upbringing, Changing Star had probably never been in a normal residence. Strangely, she was someone who had only experienced living in upscale manors and squalid dream realm slums, with nothing in between. Still, Sunny was not discouraged. He grinned and nodded proudly. "Yes. Bought it fair and square, with the contribution points from my first research paper. I own this place." Nephis hesitated. "What happened to the walls?" His smile dimmed a little. Effie happened. Of course, he had long cleaned the mess that the Huntress created after ascending. However, Sunny had been too preoccupied with other matters to enact proper repairs. As the result, the guest bedroom only had a flimsy curtain covering its irregular dot-shaped entrance, but no door. "Maybe I should get to it." Sunny cleared his throat, then gestured at the living room section of the main space. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll make us something to eat." As the cohort settled, he walked to the kitchen area and stood in front of the open refrigerator for some time, thinking. For some reason, Sunny had a strong desire to cook up something special. Nephis must have been sick of eating monster meat for years, so. Finally, he produced a number of ingredients and laid them out on the cooking surface, then started the preparations. Fried rice should do the job. Omuris. Do I have eggs?" As he went about it, the discussion reached a poignant moment. Cassie was finishing describing the important details of the reason for their tense relationship with Clan Valor. "And so, we accomplished our goal and ascended. However, that man. Mordred, he must have ascended, as well. His clan doesn't know that yet, so their response was only mildly aggressive. Sky Tide of White Feather took most of the blame for his escape and the consequent death of Saint Cormac. That did not save us from all fallout, sadly." She paused, and then added somberly. "They have secretly captured 2 of the Loyalist Forgotten Shore survivors. The rest of us took shelter in the Dream Realm. For the past 6 months, Sunny's contact in the government acted as an intermediary to arrange a peaceful negotiation. It seems that Valor is finally ready to talk, but they aim to recruit at least one of us into their clan." The blind girl sighed. "The 4 of us are already a very important asset, but with the addition of the Fire Keepers, our value is nothing short of tremendous. If they can't get all of us, they are determined to at least make sure that we don't pledge allegiance to their competitors. Of course, now that you are here, the situation has become even more fraught with tension. Valor will be much more motivated." Cassie smiled weakly, and then said in an apologetic tone. I'm sorry to have to burden you with all that right after you return." Nephis remained silent for a few moments, then shook her head. "No. You were right to inform me. Thank you." A grim and thoughtful look appeared on her face. Sunny, meanwhile, listened to the conversation silently. He was darkly perplexed by the fact that his life had turned out in such a way that encountering words like loyalists, government contact, and allegiance in a casual conversation did not seem out of place. Effie, meanwhile, looked at Changing Star with curiosity and asked. "I get what our problem with the great clans is. What's your problem with them? I thought that you, of all people, would have been chummy with the top legacies, Princess." Nephis looked at her without any amusement. "They want me dead." The Huntress blinked a couple of times. "What? Why?" Changing Star shrugged. "You'll have to ask them." Effie remained silent for a while, thinking. After some time, she frowned and asked. "So was Castor?" Nephis simply nodded. "He was." Kai looked at them with confusion. "He was what?" Everyone turned to him, suddenly realizing that the archer was less informed about some of the darker secrets of what had happened on the Forgotten Shore than the rest of them. After a while, Effie shook her head. I mean, aren't you the walking lie detector? What do you think Castor was up to? Kai coughed. Oh, he was indeed a bit dishonest sometimes. But I just assumed that he was trying to hide his feeling for Lady Nephise. At that moment, Sonny walked over carrying 7 plates. He held 2 in his hands, 2 more in shadowy limbs that played the role of a second pair of hands, balanced 2 on his forearms, and the 7th was swaying slightly on top of a tangible shadow that resembled a long tail. Placing a plate of delicious, steaming omuris in front of Kai, he said with a crooked grin. Oh, he had feelings for her for sure. The feelings of wishing to kill her to complete his mission. Sadly, he stumbled on me first. It was a sad thing, indeed. If Sonny had not killed Castor, if Nephise had known in advance that slaying the Crimson Terror would force the Spire to seek another conduit, if Cassie's vision had been more detailed, well, there was no point in feeling regret now. What had been done was done. The current conversation just went to show that Kai's strange flaw, while useful, was also often detrimental and misleading. As Kai stared into the distance in stunned silence, Sonny placed the other plates on the table, pushed 3 of them toward Effie, dismissed the shadows, and landed on a soft armchair. Then, he picked up his utensils, smelled the omuris, and let out a satisfied sigh. What are you waiting for, fools? Dig in. Chapter 776 The Enemy of My Enemy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The omuris disappeared from the plates with a speed that made Sonny a bit full of himself. He smiled proudly, and then looked at Nephise. So, what do you think about the mess we're in? She put down her utensils, looked at the empty plate with a hint of regret, and then asked. That Mordred, the rank of his aspect is the same as ours. Sonny nodded, prompting her to frown. While she thought, he reluctantly added. He is also older and more powerful than us, and possesses more knowledge than anyone in the waking world should have. Other than that, he is, actually, I don't know what he is, I just feel that something is very wrong with that guy. Regardless, he is dead set on destroying Clan Valor. It is just hard to tell how he is going to go about accomplishing that goal. Changing Star remained silent for a few moments, then said evenly. He is going to search for allies. Sonny's expression grew a little darker. Mordred is not exactly a team player. Nephise slowly shook her head. It doesn't matter. No matter how powerful he has become, it won't be enough to reach his goals. The enemy is too strong. Their power is too absolute. She did not say it, but from the grim expression on her face, Sonny could guess what Changing Star was thinking about. That she was in the exact same position. Which did not bode well. He grimaced. So, do you think that we should expect to find the bastard on our doorstep one day? The enemy of my enemy, and all that. Sonny was not looking forward to meeting Mordred again, let alone getting entangled with him in any shape or form. As far as he was concerned, the Prince of Nothing would bring nothing but trouble. Nephise frowned, then said with uncertainty. No. I doubt it. Well, if she was right, that was a relief. At that moment, Cassie deactivated her communicator and turned to face them. The Fire Keepers have reached the Immortal Flame Manor. They are putting on a show to make it seem like there are all kinds of activity going on inside. Hopefully, that is going to make most people think that you are there with them. You should not be bothered by anyone here, for a while. She paused for a moment, then sighed. But that is not going to last long. Maybe a week, the rest of us should not linger, as well. It would be strange if Kai, Effie, and I are not seen at the manor. We will leave shortly and join the Fire Keepers. Which would leave Sonny and Nephise alone. He did not know how to feel about that. Effie, meanwhile, glanced at the empty plates and said in a petulant tone. I live here as well, you know. Cassie turned to her with a deadpan expression. Not for the next week, you don't. As the huntress let out a sigh, the blind girl hesitated for a few seconds, and then said. I am also in contact with the government representatives and Clan Valor. They understand the pressure you are facing so soon after you return, so they are willing to be patient. For now. That will buy you a short buffer before they come knocking. Be ready to receive some requests for public appearances and so on in a week or two, as well as demands to resume the negotiations. We can stall for a time, but not forever. C. Nephis looked at her calmly, then asked. What about Song and Night? Cassie frowned. Clan Song might try to get involved in the negotiations, but I don't expect them to be too forceful. They are in a more advantageous position than Valor right now, after all. As for the House of Night, they are remaining strangely passive these days, for some reason. Maybe they just know that they have less to offer than the other two great clans, and don't want to bother. Sunny had a different explanation for why the Nightwalkers had less time to participate in the schemes of the two greater clans, but chose to remain silent. The information provided to him by Master Jet had been shared in confidence. Even if he wanted to, he couldn't go around spreading it. The blind girl sighed, then rose from her seat. Try to rest well during this week, Neph. Don't neglect your recovery. We know that you are strong, but no one is truly infallible. Perhaps none of us has experienced as much pain as you had in these past few years, but we faced our share. Some more than others. She briefly faced Sunny, then turned away and lowered her head. So, we understand how precarious it is to go on as if nothing happened without giving the old wounds a chance to heal. Don't be stubborn and have some pity on yourself, for a change. Nephis looked at her. After a few moments, a pale smile appeared on her face. You don't have to lecture me, Cass. You are overestimating my resolve. I am more than willing to rest for a while. Happy, even. The words rest and happy hardly fit in the image of changing star they were accustomed to, but no one said anything. An ordeal like the one she had gone through was bound to change anyone, even someone as determined and unflinching as Nephis. Cassie smiled, and then addressed Effie and Kai. Let's go, then. There's a lot of work to be done at the manor. We need to renovate it a little and make some adjustments to convert it into a proper clan headquarters. Soon, they said their goodbyes and left. The PTV came online and swiftly disappeared from view. Sunny and Nephis were left alone in the cozy gray house. He hesitated for a bit, and then looked at her with a bit of awkwardness. Well, make yourself at home, I guess. Actually, let me give you a tour. Chapter 777 Blind Date. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. In one of the most upscale districts situated near the heart of the city, a fancy, but not overly opulent restaurant was welcoming the first few visitors of the day. While some owners made a point of following the archaic traditions and hired human servers, this particular establishment was aimed at a mostly young audience. For that reason, a lot of things were automated and could be easily accessed through personal communicators of the patrons. The chefs were still human, of course. They were also true masters of their craft. Every ingredient used by them was natural, as well, while some were even imported from other quadrants. The interior design was similarly luxurious, with natural wood visible everywhere. Authentic paintings from centuries past hung on the walls, protected by thick sheets of transparent alloy. Everything was expensive, stylish, and screamed of class. Such a restaurant, of course, was only accessible to citizens of the highest ranks, who could afford to dine here. It was especially popular among young heirs of the city elite, and had a reputation for being a prime spot for arranged dates and romantic occasions. Currently, a couple of such meetings were taking place inside, with wealthy young men and women going through the awkward motions of attending a blind date arranged for them by their families. Strangely, the most striking visitor of the famed restaurant sat alone, as if her date was running late. The young woman seemed to be in her mid-twenties, but possessed elegance and grace that spoke of strange maturity. She was exquisitely beautiful, with a supple figure and flawless skin. The beauty was wearing a stylish red dress and a black leather jacket. A few tasteful pieces of jewelry adorned her fingers and delicate neck. Other female visitors of the restaurant couldn't help but feel exasperated by the fact that their date seemed to be unable to stop stealing glances at the beautiful woman. The men, meanwhile, were all wondering what kind of a fool would keep such a belle waiting. If only they were in his place, they wouldn't be so tardy. Finally, the doors opened, and a new visitor came in. The young man looked around, scratched the back of his head, and then headed toward the table where the striking beauty sat alone. Sitting down, he smiled sheepishly and said, "Sorry for being late. I hope you did not have to wait too long." The young woman smiled politely, revealing her pearly white teeth. "No problem at all." She studied the young man for a few moments, and then said with a bit of reproach in her pleasant, velvety voice, "I hate to say it, but you don't look like the images I was shown at all." He looked down, as if embarrassed. "Oh. I had to wear something inconspicuous. Walking around as my usual self would be a bit too ostentatious. However, isn't it the same for you? All that makeup to hide your complexion." The young woman frowned. "It is a cosmetic memory, I'll have you know. Regardless, I have already ordered something to eat. You can peruse the menu while we wait." The young man hesitated, then looked around with an amused expression. Finally, he asked, "How do I do that?" She glanced at him with curiosity. "You don't know? Have you never been to a proper restaurant before?" The young man smiled and shook his head, then said wistfully, "To tell you the truth, this is my first time visiting a restaurant. I was raised in the dream realm, after all. I only returned to the waking world when I was around 13. Many things here seem very strange to me." With that, Mordred thumb-led with his communicator for a bit and finally managed to open the menu. The body he was wearing used a biometric lock, at least, otherwise, he wouldn't have known how to access the communicator at all. He looked at all the options projected in front of him and asked, "What do you recommend?" The beauty smiled. "I doubt that we have similar tastes." At that moment, the dish she had ordered finally arrived. It was a steak, prepared so rare that it barely looked cooked at all. The young woman elegantly sliced a small piece and brought it to her sensual lips, which were as red as blood. Mordred observed her with a pleasant expression. "Ah, yes. I've heard that you and your sisters follow a very special diet, Lady Song." The young woman licked her lips and looked at him with a neutral expression. "Just call me Saishin. There's no need to be formal." He smiled. "So, Saishin, why did she send you, of all people? Are you so expendable that the queen does not mind sacrificing you to me, should the date go badly?" Song Sai-shan calmly ate another piece of the steak, then wiped her lips with a napkin. "Why would our date go badly? We have a common goal, after all. Our clan is your best chance to achieve it." Mordred thought for a bit, then nodded and sighed. "True. However, with that Antarctica thing going on, would have thought that she would be reluctant to move forward. After all, it's not the best time to do anything drastic." Saishin studied the Prince of War for a few moments, and then smiled. "Oh, on the contrary. We think that the event in Antarctica sets the best stage to do something drastic." He hesitated for a while, then shrugged. "Well, fair enough. So, what now? Do I have to kneel and recite a vow? Kiss your ring? Or do something else?" The beauty shook her head. "Usually, you would have had to sign a contract with a drop of your blood. However, considering your propensity to change attires, that would hardly do anything, wouldn't it?" She smiled. "So, there's no need. Welcome to the clan Song, Prince Mordred. I look forward to all the great things we will accomplish together. Mordred reciprocated her smile, then chose a couple of options in the menu and pressed them. Then, he sighed and said with a bit of amusement. Ah, it feels strange to be adopted. Chapter 778 In the Shadows. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Eventually, Sunny and Nephise ended up in his underground dojo. Changing Star looked around, her gaze lingering on the racks of training weapons and the deactivated sleeping pod that stood forlornly in its alcove, all but forgotten by its former occupant. After a few moments of silence, she asked. Do you make use of all these weapons? Sunny glanced at the training equipment, lingered for a moment, then shook his head. Yes and no. In the past 2 years, I did expand my repertoire to include all kinds of sharp implements. But I practice with something better. He was still most confident when wielding swords akin to Azure Blade, Midnight Shard, and his Serpentine Odachi. His proficiency with spears was also quite high, and he was steadily improving his archery skill. However, while Sunny had learned enough to feel comfortable with other types of weapons as well, he had a long way to go before truly mastering them. Nephise nodded thoughtfully. Do you use the Soul Serpent? Sunny stared at her for a moment, then looked away. Yes. He was reminded of the shadow bond that connected them. Beyond its main function, it also allowed Sunny to peer into some of Changing Star's secrets. However, she was able to learn a lot of his, as well. Sunny had suspected that this was the case from the very start, but now those suspicions were confirmed. He remained silent for a few moments, then suddenly grinned. Were you surprised? Benov Nephise looked at him, hesitated for a moment, and said. I was. Very. Very much. She sighed, sat down on the floor, and crossed her legs. I always knew that you were extraordinary. I just didn't think that you possessed a divine aspect, too. To be honest, I thought that I was the first. Sunny sat down opposite her and shook his head. Yeah, I thought so too. But neither of us was the first. It was Mordred, instead. He is older than us by 4 or 5 years, and had his first nightmare when he was 12. So, he received a divine aspect when you were around 8, and I was around 7. He paused, and said with a bitter smile. Come to think of it, he probably became a sleeper around the time my mother died. Oh, your mother is fine, by the way. Cassie and I visited her from time to time, while you were gone. As a hint of emotion appeared on Neff's face, she lowered her head. Thank you. Then, she lingered for a moment and asked. Do you mind telling me where the divine memory in your possession came from? The Weaver's Mask. Sunny smiled darkly. Do I mind? I do. But I'll tell you anyway. I found it below the cathedral in the Dark City, on an ancient corpse that turned to dust as soon as I took the mask from it. Changing Star tilted her head a little. Do you mind telling me what it does? He laughed. Why not? I'll tell you. It can reverse one's flaw. A sudden silence settled in the dark chamber. Nephise looked at him, a hint of longing and pain reflecting in her striking eyes. Sunny grinned. Why? Do you want to take it from me? All you have to do is to say the word. It's not like I can refuse. She stared at him for a long time, then silently turned away and did not say anything. Sunny's grin turned somber. Good decision. Did you think that it will save you from the pain? It won't. The mask does not nullify the flaw, it just reverses it. No matter what, the flaw is still a curse. By now, we both should have a good sense about such things. Chances are, the new curse would be more terrible than the old. Right now, you have to burn yourself alive every time you actively use your aspect. With the help of the mask, you would most likely be burning without reprieve, forever, unless you were using it. He grew silent, and then added. The mask can also kill you in many other ways. It is, too powerful to be used lightly. At least by the likes of us. Nephis hesitated for a few moments, then gritted her teeth. It is fine. I don't need to be liberated from my flaw. I don't need a powerful memory to uplift me. I myself is enough. Sunny stared at her, then shook his head. You are exactly the same, you did not change at all. I thought that 2 years of despair would have made you a little smarter. But you are still clinging to your deranged dreams, aren't you? She looked at him, remained silent for a while, and then smiled with the corner of her mouth. Despite the smile, however, her eyes remained calm and cold. 2 years. No. I've been desperate for much longer than that, Sunny. Why would I change now? He let out a long sigh, then looked to the side. Indeed. So. Aster, Song, Vale. They are your next targets, aren't they? She nodded silently, prompting him to add. You told me once that just knowing these words can get a person killed. However, I went ahead and did some digging of my own. Aster, Song and Vale are Asterian, Ki Song, and Anvil of Valor, correct? The former members of your father's cohort. Nephis nodded again, looking at him intensely. Sunny scowled. They are also known as the Sovereigns. Because they have conquered the fourth nightmare. They are one rank above the Transcendent. They are supreme, are they not? Without saying anything, she just nodded for the third time. Sunny hesitated for a while, and then asked. They killed your father, didn't they? Nephis continued to look at him, white flame dancing in her eyes. After some time, she sighed. Yes. I believe so. My father, he died when I was 4. Before that, the members of his cohort were like aunts and uncles to me. Aster, Song, Vale, that was what he called them. They were his friends. Her expression turned dark. But after he was gone, something changed. I was too little to understand, but none of these friends came to our help. Instead, the immortal Flame clan fell while their clans soared. And a couple of years after that, the first assassin was sent to eliminate me. Sunny rubbed his face, then asked in an exasperated voice. But why? Why did they turn on him? Nephis looked away. That I don't know. He frowned and hesitated for a moment. He had suspected that he would receive such an answer. However, there was one small detail that did not make sense to him. If they are so mighty and powerful, then how are you still alive? Why did the Sovereigns fail to kill you? All they had to do was pay you a visit in person. No amount of awakened guards, or even masters, would have been able to stop even one of them. Neff glanced at him and said, her voice even. They can't. Sunny raised his eyebrows. What do you mean, they can't? Is there some agreement that prevents them from acting directly? Changing Star slowly shook her head. No. They simply can't. The Sovereigns, it is hard for them to enter the waking world. Chapter 779 Unmoored. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Noticing the astonished look on his face, Nephis sighed. You must have felt a change in your connection to the dream realm and the waking world when you ascended. Didn't you? Sunny slowly nodded, remembering how he first explored his ability to enter the dream realm physically. The process wasn't instantaneous, but it also wasn't too burdensome. He just had to concentrate, feel his connection to the anchor, and reach for it. After a few minutes, he would poof out of existence in reality and appear near the gateway in the ivory tower. Leaving a tether in the waking world wasn't hard either, although it took more time and some essence. It was as instinctual as summoning memories or commanding echoes. With the knowledge Sunny had received from being collared in the Red Colosseum, he understood that this hinted at the fact that traveling between the two worlds was one of the functions of the spell, as opposed to something tied to his aspect. After he nodded, Changing Star continued. Awakened establish a connection with the dream realm by anchoring themselves to a gateway. Ascended expand on that connection, making them less tied to the waking world, and thus capable of traveling between the two at will. Transcendent exist in a state of perfect balance. They are connected to both worlds in equal measure, which makes them independent of gateways. In a sense, they are the gateway, which is why they can even bring another person with them in their travels. She paused, and then added in a somber tone. However, that balance is broken once a person becomes supreme. It shifts, tying them to the dream realm instead of the real world. In truth, I don't know much about the power of the sovereigns. All I know is that it is restricted in the waking world, and that they can't enter it freely. That is why none of them could harm me directly. Sunny stared, shocked. That revelation, it made so much sense. It explained so many things, from how Nephi's was able to survive to why the government still wielded a lot of power in the waking world. It also gave credence to Master Jet's statement that the sovereigns had long given up on reality. Was that what awaited Sunny if he somehow became supreme one day, himself? Feeling as if the world was spinning around him, Sunny frowned, and then asked in a dark tone. What happens if one becomes sacred, then? Would they lose their connection to the real world entirely? Nephi shrugged. I don't know. No one knows. No one had ever conquered the fifth nightmare, after all. A heavy silence settled between them. After a while, Sunny suddenly asked. What are domains? He had not forgotten that detail, either. Back on the Ashen Barrow, Nephi had asked him which domain he belonged to. He had not known what she meant then, and he did not know now. Neph sighed. That. I am not entirely sure, myself. All I know is that each sovereign rules over a domain. It is an expression of a function of the aspect, distinct from abilities, but sharing a lot in common with them. In practice, it is synonymous with their authority and the territories they control, as well as people that serve them. She paused for a few moments, and then added grimly. The sovereigns are already immensely powerful, but within their domains, they are practically invincible. Not even saints can hope to challenge them. Sunny let out a stifled laugh. And these are the people you want to destroy. Changing Star smiled. Why not? Nothing is absolute, Sunny. 2 years ago, I would have never challenged a sovereign. Today, I am still too weak to do it. I am still insignificant. But will it still be the case 2 years from now? Will I still be as weak, and will they still be as powerful? What about in 5 years? Things never remain the same. Everything is always changing, even gods can die. Asterion, Ki Song, and Anvil of Valor are no gods, so why should they be spared? Sunny shook his head. I don't know. Forget about 2 years from now, or 5, or 10. How are you going to survive now? How are you going to avoid being squashed by them today? What is your actual plan? Nephi looked at him for a long time, and then sighed. I don't have a plan. She remained silent for a moment before adding evenly. Yet. Sunny did not know what to say, so he simply shook his head. It was pointless trying to dissuade her from her obsession, regardless. Nephi wanted to destroy the spell, and the sovereigns stood in her way. It was as simple as that, with an added weight of good old-fashioned vengeance. He was not so sure that she was completely misguided either, not anymore. Sunny wanted nothing to do with the sovereigns and the great clans, but was there really a choice? Simply by daring to be someone and possess something, he put himself in their crosshairs. As long as he had something of value, others would want to either take it away or make him serve them. That was the nature of the world. Since the great clans insisted on being in control of humanity, there was no escape from them. Unless Sunny wanted to spend the rest of his life as a hermit in the dream realm, he would have to interact with the domains, in one way or another. He would have to allow himself to be controlled, as well. A bitter smile appeared on his lips. Isn't that ironic? Why was it so hard to gain even a tiny bit of freedom in this damned world? Sunny wanted to become strong to be free, but the stronger he became, the more formidable powers wanted to subjugate him. Now, it seemed that the only choice he had was to either give up, or become even stronger still, stronger than anyone, and anything. Which was more or less exactly what Nephi's was trying to achieve, even if for a different reason. He sighed, and then waved a hand dismissively. Anyway, I'm tired of this conversation. Want to spar? Chapter 780 Friendly Spar. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Sunny and Nephis stood opposite each other, holding training swords. Both felt more than a little disturbed by how much this scene resembled their bitter confrontation at the very top of the Crimson Spire. Of course, today, the situation was completely different. They were just going for a friendly spar, not a battle to the death. There were no stakes in this training fight, no emotional investment, no complicated mixture of regret, fury, and resentment. So why did Sunny feel as though he had to prove something? Forcing himself to relax, he glanced at Nephis and attacked. Their swords met with a deafening clangor. A few seconds later, Sunny jumped away and shouted. Stop! 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 Changing Star froze while he looked around, breathing heavily. Sunny gritted his teeth and spat a muffled curse. Damnation! His idea to have a spar might not have been the wisest one he ever had. Yes, the underground dojo was designed specifically to allow Awakened to train their powers. It was isolated, reinforced, and heavily armored, able to transform into an impregnable bunker in case a gate opened nearby and a tide of nightmare creatures flooded the district. The interior was furnished with heavy plates of armored-grade ceramic alloy and supplied with training equipment meant to withstand the rigors of Awakened power. However, Sunny and Nephis weren't Awakened anymore. They were full-fledged masters, and abnormal ones at that. The alloy sword in his hand was shattered. A few plates on the floor were broken. If this continued, the repair bill for the dojo was going to really sting Sunny's wallet. More than that. Nephis was not exactly at her best. She had just returned to the waking world yesterday. Before that, she had been a sleeper, which meant that she had no experience of controlling soul essence whatsoever. Let alone doing it with intricate precision and efficiency of a master, she had never even done it crudely as an Awakened. Sunny could tell exactly how chaotic and unrestrained the flow of her essence was, because Shadow Dance now allowed him to sense the movement of the mystical energy through the bodies of his opponents. Sure, every master had an instinctual understanding of how to augment their physicality with essence, but it still took some time to get used to it, and even more to master it. However, every Ascended before changing star enjoyed having the experience of making the first steps on that long and arduous road as an Awakened. In fact, by the time Awakened reached Ascension, controlling essence was as natural to them as breathing. Not so much for Nephis. Her return as a master might have been miraculous, but it also deprived her of a lot of things that people who did not break the natural order of things usually enjoyed. She was out of her depths. As Changing Star stared at the broken sword in her hands with a deep frown, Sunny waved a hand in the air and forced out a smile. You'll have to spend some time learning how to guide your soul essence. After that, you will have to spend even more time relearning how to fight with its help. I had years of practice already, so fighting at full force won't do us any good. He thought for a bit, and then said. Alright, let's try this again, but without using any essence at all. It will be a pure test of skill. Sure, Nephis had one more core than him. But with all things considered, if both of them neglected using essence or augmenting themselves with their abilities, the gap in physical prowess should not have been too overwhelming. Once again, they stood opposite each other and concentrated. Each discarded their broken weapons and took new ones. A moment later, they clashed. This time, things went better. However, not by much. One of the problems was their battle techniques. Due to Shadow Dance and his familiarity with Nephice, it didn't take Sunny long to sense the core of her style. It had changed a lot and matured over the past 2 years, but so did his mastery of his aspect legacy. Although Sunny could not master the style yet, he attuned himself to its flow and cadence enough to be able to predict some of Neff's moves with a good degree of precision. The problem, then, was that Changing Star herself could do more or less the same. Her ability to discern, predict, and control patterns of combat was not based in affinity to shadows, and was sufficiently different from it, but achieved a similar result. It was the product of her talent, training, and incredible combat intelligence. As the result, Sunny was able to somewhat predict what Nephice was thinking of doing, while she could predict what he had predicted her actions, and change her approach on the fly, which he would also discern, and so on. It was very confusing. Sunny had never found himself in a battle that demanded so much mental gymnastics before. He was not even entirely sure what was happening. There had to be a solution for this predicament, of course, but he had no time to come up with one yet. BL.net, however, that was just half of the problem. The other half was that Neff's essence control was so rudimentary and bad that she couldn't even prevent herself from instinctively using it. As the result, Sunny had to endure sudden outbursts of speed, strength, and agility that were too chaotic to predict. Because he was holding himself back, handling this pressure was rather troublesome. At some point, Changing Star overdid it during one of her strikes, causing her second training sword to shatter, as well. The jagged end slid forward and bit into Sunny's cheek. Drops of blood fell to the floor. Sunny jerked back and grimaced, feeling that the left side of his face was seriously torn. The wound was bad enough to cause blood weave to shed a few drops. It was nothing that he wouldn't be able to heal quickly, of course, but it still hurt. Before he could say anything, Nephice suddenly reached forward and placed a cool palm on his torn cheek. In the next moment, a brilliant white radiance illuminated the underground dojo. His pain instantly disappeared, replaced instead by relief and gentle warmth. He felt as though he was being cleansed by something pure, precious, and sacred. A pristine white flame. Standing close to each other, the two of them froze for a moment. Neff's hand rested on Sunny's cheek, which was swiftly healing. The soft radiance emanating from her skin reflected in her calm, gray eyes. Beneath that calmness, there were pain and suffering in them. Sunny moved slightly, wishing to say that she didn't have to do this. Before he had the time to speak, however, something unexpected happened. The white flames suddenly sipped under his skin. And then engulfed him.